My cheating wife, who left me when I was hospitalized, is now begging for forgiveness 12 years later. Hi, I'm Jason, male, 47, and I want to share my life incident here to get some advice. It all goes back to 12 years ago when I was married to Susan, my first wife. We were married for 7 years and blessed with 2 children, Laura and Lucas, who were 5 and 3 at the time. Life in our small Midwestern town was ordinary, filled with the steady rhythms of family dinners, weekly game nights around our worn dining table, and the comfort of knowing our parents, Tom, a dedicated high school English teacher, and Linda, a compassionate nurse at the local hospital, had instilled in us the values of hard work, humility, and the belief that character matters more than material possessions. I remember those early years vividly. Our modest home, though never lavish, overflowed with love, laughter, and the simple joys of community life. But everything changed on one fateful day, a day that still haunts me with its bitter sting. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I was driving to my office in Phoenix on what I thought would be just another routine business trip. The meeting had gone well, and I was wrapping up some paperwork in a quiet conference room when my phone buzzed. At first, I assumed it was the usual check-in from Susan. Nothing out of the ordinary. I stepped out into the hallway and answered with a casual, "Hey, what's up?" But then her voice hit me cold, almost smug. There was no preamble, no pleasantries, just, "Jason, I'm divorcing you and I've already sold our house. Jordan and I are moving in together. Good luck finding a new place." She ended it with a laugh, as if it were the punchline to some cruel joke. In that split second, the world tilted. It felt as though I were hearing someone describe my life, as if I weren't even in the room. The words were fast, sharp, each one more jarring than the last. But I knew one thing right away. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack. I forced my voice to stay calm, my tone as neutral as I could manage, replying as if she had just mentioned switching coffee brands. Her silence on the other end was brief, but I could tell she'd expected outrage, maybe even pleading from me. Instead, I offered only indifference. Inside, though, my mind roiled with a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. 6 years of marriage, and all those years of trust and shared dreams had been shattered by a single phone call. My wife had not only decided to leave me during one of the darkest times in my life. I was hospitalized after a sudden health scare, but she had the audacity to orchestrate everything so nonchalantly. I sat there in the hallway, my hand tightening around my phone, replaying her words over and over, trying to comprehend how she could be so callous. I remembered the day I ended up in the hospital, an unexpected collapse, a diagnosis that shook me to my core. I was vulnerable, weak, relying on the love and support of the one person I thought would never leave my side. Instead, Susan chose that moment to vanish, leaving me to recover alone, with my pride in tatters and my future uncertain. That painful memory fueled the fire in me. I wasn't going to let her betray me without consequences. When I returned to the conference room, my mind was no longer on the client or the business at hand. It was solely focused on the home I once shared with her, the house we had worked so hard to build, brick by brick, memory by memory. I recalled every conversation about saving for a down payment, every late night spent discussing our future in that modest home, and suddenly, it all felt like a cruel joke. The divorce call, the announcement that she had already sold the house, it wasn't just an end. It was a declaration that our shared dreams were worthless to her. I sat back down and stared blankly at the paperwork in front of me, my thoughts swirling. In that moment, a quiet determination replaced the initial shock. I knew I had taken steps long before this day. When we refinanced our mortgage, I had quietly ensured that the deed was solely in my name. It was a decision made out of practicality at the time, something I never expected would come into play. But now, it was my saving grace, my secret trump card in the face of her betrayal. That phone call, that single, cold declaration from Susan, was the final straw. I had to act, not just for myself, but for the integrity of everything we had built together. I left the conference room with a heavy heart but a clear mind, ready to reclaim control over my life. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I had already set things in motion. I would file for divorce, I'd secure every legal document, and I'd make sure that her reckless decision left her with nothing. I remembered the promises we'd made, the sacrifices we'd both endured. And now, as I sat in that quiet hallway, I vowed that I would not let her actions define me. I would use her betrayal as a catalyst to rebuild, to find a future where I wasn't constantly second-guessed or dismissed. In that moment, I knew my life was about to change forever. Even though the pain was overwhelming, there was a strange sense of relief too, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, I was free. Free from the shackles of a broken marriage, free from the lie that our love was unbreakable. And as I drove home that day, my thoughts were no longer of despair, but of a cold, calculated resolve to reclaim every piece of my life that she had tried to steal away. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also sparked in me a fire of determination, a determination to rebuild not just my home, but my entire future on my own terms. In the months and years that followed that fateful phone call, my world shifted from one of shattered trust and bitter betrayal to a long, winding road of healing and self-reclamation. I remember the early days after Susan left me when I was hospitalized, the loneliness, the endless nights spent staring at the empty walls of our home, and the cold realization that I was left to pick up the broken pieces of a life I once believed was unassailable. At first, I couldn't fathom how I would ever rebuild. Everything I had worked for, the savings, the memories, the dreams we'd built together, felt tainted by her abandonment. But as time passed, the raw pain began to transform into a determined resolve. I started to take control of my destiny. I moved out of the house we once shared, not because I wanted to run away from the memories, but because I needed space to rediscover who I was without the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest every day. I immersed myself in work, channeling the anger and heartbreak into long hours at the firm and later into rebuilding my life on my own terms. I recall spending countless evenings in a small motel room, reading old letters and financial documents, reliving the moment I discovered that the deed to our home was solely in my name, a decision I had made quietly during our refinancing that became my unexpected salvation. That realization, as painful as it was, gave me a spark of hope. I began to see that while Susan had thought she was leaving with everything, she had in fact handed me the upper hand without even realizing it. I slowly began to rebuild my life piece by piece. I moved into a modest apartment where I could finally start over. I poured my energy into my passions, writing, hiking, and even trying my hand at cooking, something I'd never had time for before. I found solace in the simple routines of life, a morning cup of coffee on a quiet porch, long walks down tree-lined streets in our small Midwestern town, and the occasional visits from close friends who reminded me that I was more than the sum of my heartbreak. Each day, I felt a little lighter, as if the weight of the past was gradually lifting. I even started volunteering at the local community center, teaching basic computer skills to seniors, which not only filled my time but also reconnected me to a community that cared for one another in ways I had almost forgotten. The bitterness of those early days began to give way to a quiet strength, and I started to realize that while the pain would never fully disappear, it could be transformed into something positive, a catalyst for growth and self-discovery. Yet, amid this journey of rebuilding, the echoes of the past continued to reverberate through my mind. Memories of Susan's cold voice on that life-altering phone call would sometimes intrude upon my newfound peace. I'd find myself wondering how someone who had once been the center of my world could vanish so abruptly, leaving nothing but a trail of shattered promises and stolen dreams. And then, unexpectedly, as if the past had not yet finished its cruel game, a message appeared on my phone one crisp autumn morning, 12 years later. The text was brief, almost apologetic. "Jason, I'm sorry. I need to talk. Please, can we meet?" My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment I was thrown back to that devastating day, reliving the shock and the overwhelming sense of loss. I stared at the screen for a long time, wrestling with a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, to maintain the wall I had built to protect myself from further pain. But another part, the part that had learned so much about forgiveness and the value of closure, wondered if perhaps this was an opportunity to finally put the past to rest once and for all. After long nights of contemplation, I decided to meet her in the old cafe near the town square, a place that held memories of simpler times, when I believed in second chances and the possibility of redemption. I arrived early, choosing a secluded corner table where I could watch the door and prepare myself for whatever was coming. The cafe was familiar and comforting, with its soft background music and the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint aroma of homemade pastries. I sat there, lost in thought, until finally Susan walked in. Time had etched lines on her face and softened her once proud gaze, but there was also an unmistakable aura of regret and vulnerability in the way she carried herself. Clad in a modest blouse and a light jacket, she looked both different and achingly the same, a reflection of the woman I once knew, now tempered by years of hardship and remorse. "Jason," she said softly, her voice trembling as if she feared the weight of her own words. I nodded, motioning for her to sit across from me. For a long, heavy moment, we simply looked at each other. No words, just a silence filled with the echoes of our shared past. Finally, she spoke. "I've spent every day since I left trying to understand what I did, trying to figure out how I could have hurt you so deeply. I'm sorry for everything, for leaving you when you needed me most, for everything I took for granted. I know I can't undo the past, but I need you to know that I regret it every single day." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and in that moment, I saw the vulnerability that had driven her away all those years ago. I listened, my own heart a battleground of memories and newfound strength. I didn't rush to forgive her, nor did I let anger cloud my judgment. Instead, I took a deep breath and asked the questions that had haunted me for so long. "Susan, after all these years, why now? What has changed?" She hesitated, then explained that in the years following our divorce, she had chased a life filled with fleeting thrills, a life that left her emptier and more isolated with each passing day. She admitted that she had lost sight of what truly mattered: love, commitment, and the deep connection we once shared. She said that the regrets were overwhelming, that each day was a reminder of the family, the home, and the dreams we'd lost because of her choices. I looked at her, my mind reeling with both the pain of the past and the cautious hope for a future that might allow me to finally let go. "I can't promise I'll take you back," I said slowly, "but I can say that I'm not the same man I was all those years ago. I've rebuilt my life piece by piece, and I'm not willing to let that foundation crumble again." Her eyes searched mine, silently pleading for a second chance, for a chance to make things right. In that moment, I realized that while forgiveness might be possible, it would come on my terms. I needed to heal fully and ensure that I would never again be betrayed by someone I once trusted with everything. As we left the cafe, the cool Midwestern air felt both refreshing and heavy, with unspoken promises. I knew that this conversation was only the beginning of a long process, one that might lead to closure, or perhaps even an unlikely reconciliation. But as I drove home, the landscape unfolding in familiar shades of autumn, I felt a tentative glimmer of hope. Maybe, after all these years, there was a way to mend the broken pieces of our past, not for the sake of rekindling what we once had, but to finally bring peace to the wounds that had defined my life for far too long. And so, with cautious optimism and the steady resolve of a man who had learned the true value of self-worth, I prepared myself for the next chapter. One where forgiveness might be possible, but only if it was earned and never forced.